Welcome to Olivia's Blooms. If you are new to my channel, I'm gardening in Charlottesville, Virginia, Zone 7B. I'm a home gardener who loves growing my own cut flowers and home decor with a focus on sustainable, regenerative, and eco-friendly practices. But most importantly, I'm here to support, share with, and learn from other gardeners. So I hope you will join me in growing this amazing gardening community. Hey guys, welcome back to Olivia's Blooms. Today's video I am so excited about. I have been wanting to make this video for a while, and this video is inspired by and for my older sister and people like her that love flowers. They like to arrange them, they really appreciate them, they think that they can't grow them even though they've maybe joked that they wish they could. And I am going to hopefully inspire them to try it and to just start their own little cut flower garden this year. So for those of you, I have some awesome viewers that are pros at growing flowers. If you have that person in your life that you think would just love growing their own flowers but thinks for some reason that they can't do it or they don't know how, send them this video and give them your tips as well, because we all know that they would fall in love and become obsessed with growing flowers. So I'm gonna go over in this video, and I'm gonna break this out in a few videos because it's a lot of information and I don't think anyone wants to sit there for 2 hours and learn all about growing flowers unless they sign up for a course, which this is not. So what this is for people like me. So in my other job, I am in leadership positions, and one of the important things I learned is that people like to absorb information and learn information in different ways. Some people like to learn information from reading a book. That's great. If you're that type of person, there's tons of great resources and books out there for how to grow cut flowers. I'm gonna put some down below. But for me personally, and a lot of people out there, they like to learn by watching other people through videos or in a classroom setting. And I personally learned so much from watching YouTube videos that I went from not having gardened a single day in my life, like gardened at all, and then at age 36, jumping into it, and within 5 years, I learned to grow buckets and buckets of flowers. And if I can do that, you absolutely can do that. I will say though that growing cut flowers and gardening in general is complicated. There's a lot of things you need to consider. There's a lot of information out there, frankly, that's not helpful, and a lot of products out there, surprisingly, that are not what makes for a good garden, but are advertised as so. And so that's why I really want to make this video too, is to put just the critical pieces of information together so that you can learn what's important, but you don't have to spend hours and hours and hours sorting through garden information. So I hope that this video gives you the confidence to start a garden. It is early March here right now. It is not too late, no matter where you are, to grow flowers this year. So this video, the first one, is gonna go over just some pieces of information that you need to know or look up if you wanna start growing flowers this year, and why you wanna look up this information. And it's not a lot, and it's easy. It's all out there on the internet. And then I'm gonna talk through some other pieces of information that I think you need to know for starting a cut flower garden. And today's video is going to be about specifically growing flowers to cut and bring inside. This video is not about how to just grow flowers for your landscape or how to vegetable garden. You could probably get some tips from these though, if you're doing either of those, because a lot of the principles about soil life and things like that are the same. This video is also going to talk a little bit about planning your space and setting that up before you even start trying to grow flowers. And you can accomplish all that with as little or as much resources as you want. It doesn't have to be expensive, but if you want to spend a little extra money and make it really beautiful space, you can do that too. That's what I love about gardening in general, is it's a creative outlet for you. It's completely yours. You can make it your own. You can focus solely on the best soil health in the world. Who cares what it looks like? Eco-friendly practices, or you can say, I want this garden bed to be as beautiful as the flowers themselves. And you get to choose how you want to do it. All right, that's enough of an intro. Let's dive into some key pieces of information. The first few pieces of information that you need to gather if you want to start your cut flower garden this year, which you do, is where are you? So gardening is very specific to where you are in a lot of different ways. But the first thing you're going to want to know is, what is your growing zone? There are, in the United States or wherever you are globally, agricultural growing zones. So why do you need to know your growing zone? Your growing zone tells you a lot of information, but for the purposes of growing cut flowers, the only thing that really matters is that your growing zone tells you what's the coldest it gets on average in your area. And you need to know that information, because if you want to, and you don't have to, but if you want to have cut flowers that are going to come back year after year, and only certain flowers do that, there's pros and cons to that, we'll get into that, but you need to know if that plant can survive the winter in your growing zone. So for example, in Charlottesville, and you can look this up by your zip code on the internet, what is my growing zone? Our growing zone here in Charlottesville is 7B. So if I want to plant flowers that I don't have to plant every year, they're called perennials or biennials as well, meaning they last for a couple years, and not all plants do that, but some cut flowers do, then I need to see, what is the growing zone of this plant? Is it only 8 and above it'll survive the winter? Well, I'm in 7B, which gets colder, so it'd be too risky unless I really want to protect that plant, which is a lot of work. But if it's a zone 3 through 8, then I can overwinter that. That's what it's called, overwintering it in my growing zone. So find out your growing zone, write that information down. The next piece of information you're going to want is, and this is very important, what are your average first and last frost dates? Your average first and last frost dates, you can look up again on the internet, average last frost date and your zip code. What that tells you is, on average, what is the last day of the year that you typically get a frost? A frost is 32 degrees and below. A hard freeze is something different. That's usually about 28 and below. But your average last frost date will tell you when is it safest to plant out plants that are frost sensitive, and not all plants are frost sensitive. Your average first frost date tells you, when does my season typically end for frost sensitive plants? So for Charlottesville, our average last frost date is April 10th. So when I'm looking at when do I want to plant out my warm season annuals and flowers, so my flowers that like it warm, I'm probably going to plant them after that average last frost date. I could plant them before, but you risk them dying or getting damaged. They might not die fully in a frost, but you might damage them, and then you don't have the healthiest plant throughout the season, and having healthy plants is really important. I could plant things out, but I might have to cover them with frost cloth if I do it too early. But again, weather is unpredictable, and so these are averages. They're not guarantees in any way, shape, or form. And if you want to play it safe, you can wait 2 weeks after your average last frost date. If, depending on how risk averse you are or how much of a risk taker you are, that's your decision you get to make. The average first frost date here in Charlottesville is October 30th. So I have from April 10th to October 30th to grow warm things that like it warm, and that tells you your growing season. But what I will also say is, a lot of people don't realize that there are flowers that love it cold and don't care about frosts. They don't even care about hard freezes. Think about those perennials we talked about that survive from year to year. A frost is, and even a hard freeze for some of those really winter hardy plants, is not a big deal. And some plants prefer to grow in 50, 60 degree weather. They prefer to flower in that weather. not all plants love it 70, 80, 90 degrees. And so what else is important to find out are what are your growing conditions? What is it like in the area you live in? And you can look at average weather patterns for your area if you want. You don't have to. You might already know this just from living in your area. But what I mean by that is, do you have long, cool springs? Or in Virginia, we almost skip spring. We go from very cold winter weather to a very short spring and then immediately into very hot weather. And that's important because that also can tell you what type of flowers you might have the most success with. For example, if I want to grow some of those flowers that like cold weather, I'll throw out some examples. I'm growing stock this year, and I'm growing some group 1 snapdragons, and we'll talk about groups and types of cut flowers in a minute. If I want to grow those, I need to start them in January, and I plant them out at the end of February here where I live, because they're not going to get enough 50 and 60 degree weather if I wait till my last frost date to plant them out. And knowing those pieces of information are so important, and it's often overlooked. And what drives me crazy is if you look at seed packets, no matter what type of flower it is, they almost always tell you to plant it after the last frost. And if you want to have success, you are probably going to want to plant a lot of cool season hardy annuals, and that's what those flowers are called, cool season hardy annuals. You're going to want to plant them out before your last frost, depending on your area. Now, if you have a very long cold spring and a very mild summer, I'm thinking of places like Michigan where my sister is, then you might be able to grow things like delphinium. I love delphinium, these beautiful tall spike flowers, but they don't do well down here because of our Virginia weather. And so what I grow instead is larkspur that has that same look, and I'll put some pictures up, and loves it down here. But that's why knowing that information is so important. It is not just about, I like that flower, I want to grow it. Find flowers that are pretty, but that will fit where you are. And that's where you'll have the most success and make gardening easier on you. Now, if you just fall in love with a plant and you want to baby it and do every kind of crazy thing you can to make it work, you get to decide that. You can do that. But for most of us, I think we want to grow what likes it in our area and our specific conditions. You don't need to know this, and you don't have to get down into the weeds on this, but it's probably helpful to know, generally speaking, what type of soil you have in the place that you are going to garden. And if you don't know, you can also look up this information on the internet, even down to your specific zip code and very local area. There's a lot of great websites out there that do soil surveys that can tell you, generally speaking, do I have sandy soil, do I have loamy soil, or do I have clay soil? And again, just like the weather patterns, it tells you what plants you're more likely to have success with, because soils act differently. So sandy soils tend to drain really well, but because they drain so well, a lot of nutrients can sometimes leave that soil. Loamy soil, if you have loamy soil, you're lucky. That's probably the ideal soil to grow flowers and anything in. Or if you have clay soil like me, it's full of nutrients, but it's compacted and you don't have a lot of oxygen. And so if you want to use the soil you have in your garden, and you don't have to, but if you want to use the soil that you have, you're going to want to know what type it is, at least in the general terms, because that will impact what you might want to add to that soil over time to make it a healthy soil that works for you. Now, you can grow in any type of soil for sure. If you don't want to even deal with soil, you can do a raised bed, and we're going to talk about that too. But knowing that type of soil, if for example you have sandy soil, you're not going to want to just grow plants that love water, and you might want to add a lot of nutrition to that soil. But if you're like me and you have clay soil, you don't want to grow, probably until you get that soil aerated, which means putting oxygen into it. You're not going to want to grow things that really like it dry or well draining soil until you add some oxygen. But you probably don't need to add a lot of nutrition to that soil. Oxygen is actually more important. So it's not just about adding fertilizer. You need to know what type of soil you have and what makes sense to grow in that type of soil and what you want to do over time to improve that specific type of soil. Or if you don't want to deal with soil, just get a raised bed. Just a couple more pieces of information about what is a cut flower. This is really important because it's not intuitive and not everyone realizes this, but not all flowers are cut flowers. So what makes a cut flower? Generally speaking, a cut flower has a longer stem, and you want long stems because if you have short stems, it's harder to make a bouquet. And then, you know, it affects what type of vase you can put it in as well. So a long stem, for example, can drink water for a long period of time. Think about a big vase that's full of water and the stem comes down to here and you fill that vase with water. That vase slowly, the water evaporates, but the bottom here is always getting that water. Now you probably want to change out that water, but that long stem will keep that flower hydrated for longer. And a cut flower's vase life is all about hydration. So that's the other thing about cut flowers is they have long vase lives. If you harvest them correctly and if they're healthy, they will last 5-7 days in a vase. Some flowers last 2 weeks in a vase. Some will last and then dry and you can keep them that way. So cut flowers have longer stems, they have a longer vase life, and there are some flowers that all of them are great cut flowers, but also some flowers have different varieties. And I'll give you a very common example is a snapdragon. So if you see a snapdragon in a garden center, you might not be able to use that snapdragon really well for a cut flower. So there are snapdragon, what's called bedding varieties, and those are short and they're meant for putting either in your landscape, like at a border, or putting in a pot and enjoying it out without cutting it. But there are other snapdragon varieties that grow big and tall and have thicker stems. And another thing is you want thicker stems for cut flowers because that also, again, helps them stay hydrated for longer. Not all flowers are good cut flowers, and not all varieties of the same plant are good cut flowers. So how do you figure out what makes a good cut flower and what doesn't? Well, if you're buying a grown-on plant in a nursery, almost always they'll tell you on the tag makes a good cut flower. You can also watch tons of amazing YouTube videos out there about best cut flowers, easiest cut flowers. If you're gonna grow from seed, which is really fun too, but you don't have to grow from seed to have a cut garden, you wanna also look for that same note that says great as a cut flower, good cut flowers. There are also some great websites that specialize in cut flowers, and Floret Flower is one. She sells beautiful cut flowers. Hers are a little more on the expensive side, but she also has a great list that just tells you places to get cut flower seeds. Some of my favorites are Johnny's Seeds, Baker Creek, and Redemption Seeds. And what I like about those websites is you can sort by, I wanna see what makes a good cut flower. The last piece of information I'll share that I think is important, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, is it an annual, is it a perennial, or some are biennials? And what that means is an annual flower is meant to grow in one growing season, so 1 year, and then die off. So it's only supposed to last that 1 year. Now, a lot of people think, why would you grow an annual then? Grow a flower that comes back year after year. Well, there's benefits to annuals and there's benefits to perennials. Perennials are plants that will come back year after year if they are hardy, which means they can survive in your growing zone, which is why you want that information about your growing zone. So, why might you grow an annual? Every flower's goal in life is to be pollinated, make a seed, and then spread that seed. So an annual only has that one season to do that, so it will flower its head off. So most annuals will work hard that one season for you, give you lots of flowers. Not all, but most. And if you keep cutting them and not let them go to seed, you'll keep getting flowers. And a lot of them will spread their seed around and grow again next year from the seed it spreads on the ground. So just because it's an annual doesn't necessarily mean that you need to replant it every year. But a lot of annuals you'll have to plant year after year. but they're typically pretty easy to grow from seed because they're meant to be spread around by seed. And they usually make for a lot of gorgeous flowers. And a lot of beautiful cut flowers are annuals. There's a lot of flower farmers out there that only grow annuals or grow mostly annuals. So they are definitely worth that extra work of having to plant them every year. Now, a perennial, what are the benefits of that? Well, obviously, a perennial plant is something that you plant once and you should have flowers for a long period of time, meaning years. Now, some perennials last longer than others. So if you grow yarrow, you might get 4 or 5 years out of that plant. If you grow something that's a biennial, like foxglove, for example, you might get 2 years out of it, and then, or 3 years, and then you probably need to have planted another one to come in its place. Another downside of perennials is that they often don't reach their full potential until 2 or 3 years. So if you plant, for example, I'll use yarrow again. Let's say you want a big patch of yarrow so that you can cut yarrow every year for your cut flowers. That first year, you might get some blooms, or they might be fewer blooms. They might not be as tall. The second year, you might get more. And then that third year is when perennials, generally speaking, are finally reach their full potential. So you might have to wait a while, but then once you've invested that time, you'll have beautiful flowers every year without having to do much other than maybe fertilize them, maybe divide them, a little bit of maintenance, but otherwise easy. Now, whether or not you want to do annuals or perennials might also depend on how much space you have. So if you only have a little patch of space and you want to do something different every year, because gardening and growing cut flowers, it's such a fun, creative outlet. So you might want to switch it up every year, and if that's the case, you might want to only do annuals. If you have tons of space and it's intimidating to fill it, maybe you just want to do some perennials and then leave yourself some space for annuals every year. There's a place for both in the cutting garden. All right, so that was a lot of information. Here's some pretty pictures of flowers just to give us a break. Okay, just to remind you why you're here learning all this information. Okay, so now you are an expert on what is a cut flower, where is your growing zone, all of that. The first thing you're gonna wanna do before you even buy a flower or buy a seed, although I don't blame you if you already have, if you're that excited, I probably would do the same thing. You're gonna wanna know where are you gonna grow these flowers? For most successful cut flower gardens, you are gonna want a spot in your yard or wherever you're gonna grow that gets full sun. Most cut flowers love full sun, need full sun. And yes, it is really important to give that flower the conditions that it needs to thrive. Because if you grow a full sun flower in part sun or in shade, it either isn't gonna flower well, or it's gonna be long and sad and leggy, and it's probably not gonna last long in the vase or perform like you really want. What is full sun? Full sun really means a spot that gets 6 to 8 hours a day. The more sun, the better. So you can grow a successful cut flower garden in full shade, but you're gonna be really limited on the number and the type and variety of flowers you can grow. I can make a whole video about if you only have shade, you can still grow cut flowers. It's gonna be a little more challenging, I'm not gonna lie. So if you have a spot that's full sun, use that spot. You're gonna wanna set up your growing space next before you get started. And this can be as cheap and easy or as expensive or as complicated as you want, depending on what you wanna get out of your garden. It might just be cut flowers, or it might be a beautiful visual display of plants. If your goal though is to have a beautiful visual display, you should know that a successful cut flower garden is probably not gonna look like it has many flowers in it. And why is that? It's because the more you cut your flowers, the more they're gonna grow for most flowers. So if you're letting those flowers bloom and go to seed, they're not gonna last as long. The plants are not gonna last as long, and you're not gonna get flowers as long as if you're constantly cutting on them. So if your goal is just to be able to look out the window at flowers, then you're not gonna necessarily wanna have a cutting garden. But of course you can have both. All right, so once you find a spot with full sun, you wanna decide about what type of garden or growing space you wanna have. I would recommend, again, if you are gonna grow in the ground, know at a minimum what type of soil you have and give it what it needs to be successful that first year. So if you have very sandy soil, maybe think of adding a lot of compost and working the compost in, or plant plants that like drier, well-draining conditions. If you're in clay like me, I would say aerate that soil with a broad fork. You can till, but there's some downsides to tilling as well. Because another important thing that I want all of you to know about growing flowers, growing plants, that is not intuitive and it's not well described or mentioned, I think, in the flower industry, especially with products that you buy, is the life in your soil matters as much as anything else in terms of your plant's growth. Now think of your own body and your gut health. It's not pleasant necessarily to think about, but all of those microbes and bacteria that live in your gut actually make you healthier. There's a symbiotic relationship where they benefit and you benefit. The soil and plants, it's exactly the same. You want tons of healthy, good bacteria in your soil. You also want a really healthy ecosystem in your garden, which means all different types of bugs. You want birds. Maybe you don't want rodents, but you want there to be a natural ecosystem that keeps your flowers healthy, that keeps your soil healthy. What you don't want is sterile soil. And that's another problem. So when I mentioned I have clay soil, one of the issues is it's hard for microorganisms and worms and the things that are beneficial in that soil life to thrive because that soil is so compacted. That's why oxygenating that soil is so important. It's important for the plant roots to get oxygen, but it also enables that soil life to grow. It enables the worms to make their way through the soil. They can't make their way through clay. And so ultimately the goal of any plants you're growing in soil is to make sure you are feeding that soil life, the fungus in the soil, the healthy fungus. That's why mushrooms aren't necessarily a bad thing. You want that soil life. Your plants will be healthier, more pest and disease resistant if you have that soil life. And it's not necessarily intuitive. So the problem with tilling and with ripping, let's say, grass off of a plant bed and leaving it bare is you might be killing a lot of that soil life. So that's why there's a lot of popular methods like no dig or no till, because the goal is to not disturb the soil structure and the soil life, but promote it as much as possible. And so soil health is as important as anything else when you're growing anything, including cut flowers. And I say that because if you're gonna grow in your own soil, keep that in mind when you are treating that soil. You can add compost, you can add other things, you can add worm castings that will, again, promote that soil life. But whatever type of soil you're growing in, have that in the back of your mind. And you'll sound really smart when you talk to your friends and you're like, oh, I'm improving the soil life for my plants. But if you are like, I don't want to deal with what kind of soil I have, I don't want to deal with soil life, raised bed gardening might be right for you. What is a raised bed garden? It's literally a container that you raise off the ground as high as you want. I would recommend at least 14 inches. You can go higher if you don't want to bend over. You can go lower, but it's a container where you can control the soil that goes in it. Now, positives of a raised bed, you can control the soil that goes in it. Negatives, it can be more expensive. to buy a raised bed. You can build a raised bed. If you're interested in building your own, there's tons of great videos out there about how to build a raised bed. It's not super expensive to build it on your own, but you can also find really inexpensive ones out there. I chose to do raised bed gardening when I moved here for my vegetables and some of my flowers because I knew this soil was clay and compacted, and because this was a brand new garden, I was starting from scratch and I wanted immediate success. So I was willing to invest a little bit more. I personally love Greens Fence's raised beds. I found them to be really affordable, really easy to put together. And I bought 7 of them, and that's what's out in my raised vegetable garden. I'll show you some shots of those, but there are tons of different looks and materials you can use. You can find them at Costco, you can order them online. There's metal raised bed gardens. So raised bed gardens not only help you control the soil, but they also give you a chance to kind of create whatever aesthetic you want in your garden. You can get white ones, you can get rusty metal ones. So if that's the way you want to go, have some fun with it and do what makes sense for you. If you are just growing for cut flowers, you probably don't need to be as concerned about the types of materials. If you are planning on maybe growing some food in your raised gardens, it might be worth doing a little bit of research about the material you're using to make sure it's going to be food safe and not leaching plastics into your soil. If you are also going to be raised bed gardening, or container gardening is another thing you can do. If you just want to grow in pots, you won't be able to grow as much, but you can certainly have success growing flowers in pots. Some of the most beautiful cut flowers people love, like dahlias, do well in pots. Make sure you are putting in those pots the right type of soil. And I say that because you might not realize that for a raised bed garden, while you could just dig up your own soil and fill it, you're going to be bringing along with you the same problems that were in that soil to begin with. It's cheaper, but if you're going to use a raised bed garden and you can afford it, and it's usually not too expensive, use a raised bed gardening mix. If you can find one that says it has any kind of mycorrhiza, that's a type of soil life supplement. If you can find organic, they usually have a lot of soil life in them. But use a raised bed mix. You don't want to use native soil, can have also issues with drainage. Raised bed mix is a mix of potting soil and compost. You could probably make your own raised bed mix, but you'll want to look up what is the right ratio of potting soil to compost so that you have the right drainage and you're not waterlogging that soil. The same goes for if you're growing in a pot, a small container. You might just want to use potting soil, again, because you have to think about the drainage and how the water is going to move through that soil because of the type of structure it's in. Because I have 7 4x8 raised beds out there, I bought and had trucked in a bunch of raised bed mix because it was cheaper than buying a bunch of bags, and I wheelbarrowed it in. But if you're just doing 1 or 2 small beds, just buy some bags of raised bed mix and fill it up. And right there, you're starting off with great soil. So that's an easy way to have a lot of success. But it is important the type of soil you're putting in a raised bed. Don't use topsoil, don't use pure potting soil. Get the right type of soil, you will thank yourself. All right, the last thing I'll talk about, because this video is already super long. So you've picked your spot, you've picked what type of garden you want to have. You also want to think through when you're planning your space, how much space do you have? And it's good to have that in mind. If you are imagining in your head, tons and tons of mixed bouquets, but you're only gonna do one, let's say 2x2 raised bed, you're probably not gonna be able to grow as many flowers as you want in that bed. And maybe you just wanna bring in a couple bunches of sunflowers for a couple weeks, and that's totally fine. If you're imagining though, bringing in lots and lots of flowers, you wanna think through how much space do I need to grow that number of flowers. Some of the information that can tell you that is the spacing. So if you're growing flowers that they recommend 12 to 18 inches of space, and you have a 4x4 bed, that's 16 plants you can grow in that bed. And you don't need to do all the calculations, but it's good to think through in general how much space you can have. And if you only are able to have a little bit of space, that's fine too, but that will inform what kind of flowers you want to grow and whether or not you want to just plant one and done. So I'm just going to plant warm season plants once and leave them in there. Or if you want to maximize a small amount of space, you can plan it out so that you have cold, cool season flowers in there first. Then when those are done, you can put in your warm season. And if you have a really long growing season like we do, you might be able to get another fall crop of plants, although that's probably pushing it a little bit, especially for a brand new gardener. But hey, shoot for the stars. All right, so that was a lot of information, but you got it. Go get started. Grab the stuff you want, plan it out, just get out there and make your garden. And in the next video, we're gonna talk through how to pick what you wanna grow a little more in depth. And that's gonna be really fun. Thinking through what kind of looks you wanna go for, or what type of bouquets do you wanna bring in for yourself, or bunches. And if you enjoyed this video, or if you have other tips for people that are just starting out, put them in the comments below, because I really want to encourage so many people to start their flower garden this year. You will love it. You will have success. You're probably gonna have some failures too. That's just part of the process, but you will definitely have some success and you'll feel so proud of yourself and it'll be so much fun. So thank you guys for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful, and I'm here with you. There'll be more videos to come. You can do this. I hope you had as much fun planning your first garden today as I did. Thanks. Today's video is both inspired by and primarily for my sister and people that like her. Not people that like her, people like her. It's literally a container. Could you drink a little quieter?